Good morning, everyone. My name is Brittany Minoff. I am the Communications Manager at the NYC Hospitality Alliance, and I'd like to welcome you all to our vaccination mandate conflict resolution training with the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, also known as OATH. So today, the OATH team will be focused on conflict resolution for restaurant and nightlife workers during this time of the Key to NYC vaccination mandate. So there will be an opportunity for a Q&A at the end. So be sure to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to all of your questions. So before we get started on the training, I would like to give the virtual floor to Joni Kletter, who's the Commissioner of OATH. So Joni, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the New York Hospitality Alliance for hosting this webinar. I'm Joni Kletter, Commissioner of OATH. OATH is the city's independent and impartial administrative law court, where all city agencies file their civil cases for trials and hearings. OATH, though, also houses the Center for Creative Conflict Resolution, which is the central resource for alternative dispute resolution and mediation for New York City government. Our Center for Creative Conflict Resolution is staffed with professional mediators who are super experienced and knowledgeable in conflict resolution. So today you're going to hear from two of those folks. One is Justo Sanchez, the Center's Director of Services, and Halley, Anolik, the Center's Director of Training and Education. But first, you will hear from Ariel Palitz, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and a great partner to our agency, who has been pivotal in supporting hospitality business during the pandemic. One of my goals when I came to OATH last year was expanding the role of the center to provide services not just to city agencies, but to the public as well. And as part of that, last year, OATH's Center partnered with Ariel Palitz and the Office of Nightlife to launch a program called MEND NYC, which stands for Mediating Establishment and Neighborhood Disputes. MEND provides free mediation services as well as conflict resolution services to address a number of neighborhood disputes that impact New Yorkers. So as you know, quality of life complaints like sound, sanitation, and other issues can impact businesses, especially with outdoor dining and open streets. And MEND provides New Yorkers a way to resolve those disputes through mediation without resorting to 311 or to the NYPD or the civil summons system. Mediating directly with the complainant can be much faster and produce a longer lasting resolution so that parties can coexist peacefully now and into the future. It also avoids financial penalties on already struggling small businesses. So we're going to put a link to MEND in the chat, and to learn about this free service, you can just visit nyc.gov/MENDNYC. And I hope you'll check that out because we think it's a really important resource for small businesses. I'm now going to pass it to Ariel Palitz to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Kletter, and to OATH and the Hospitality Alliance for hosting this important webinar. I'm Ariel Palitz, again, the Executive Director for the Office of Nightlife. And for those of you who don't know, the Office of Nightlife is a dedicated non-enforcement liaison between the city and the nightlife industry and community. We're all here today to bring you an important training from OATH's Center for Creative Conflict Resolution to help deal with some of the difficult situations that might arise at your establishments. The Key to NYC mandate is intended to ensure that as many New Yorkers as possible are getting vaccinated in order to avoid reliving the experience we all had last year with shutdowns and capacity limitations, just to make sure that we continue to move forward through this pandemic quickly and safely. This webinar is to ensure that you and your staff can be as prepared as possible for whatever disputes may arise, with some helpful conflict resolution skills that can also be helpful in other aspects of your life. The Office of Nightlife has been working successfully in partnership with Oath Center for Creative Conflict Resolution, as Joni mentioned, on our recently launched free mediation program called Mend NYC to help resolve quality of life conflicts between venues and neighbors through direct communication and compromise. So we know that they are well positioned to help prepare you to address disputes and conflicts with patrons at the door or elsewhere. Before we get to the presentation, I want to acknowledge that there may still be questions about the Key to NYC mandate and inspections. While this webinar is dedicated to conflict resolution skills, if you do have questions, we do have people in our chat room, and we'll do our best to answer them in the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. We will also get back to you directly if you leave your contact information in the Q&A. Just want to let you know you can also always reach out to the Office of Nightlife directly with any questions you have about anything, anytime, at nightlife@media.nyc.gov, which is also in the chat. And so with that, we will start the conflict resolution presentation. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to present on our conflict resolution key to NYC Vax mandate webinar. I hope that you're all doing well. I'm Justo Sanchez. I serve as the Director of Services. I'm co-presenting this morning with my colleague, Halley.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. My name's Halley. I'm the Director of Education and Training.
Thank you, Halley. And as it's already been mentioned, at the center, we offer a range of services to support city government and its agencies in preventing and managing conflict in positive ways. So today we've been invited by the Hospitality Alliance to present our conflict resolution webinar, which some of you may have already watched on YouTube, but we'll be going over it again today. And since it's live, as has been mentioned, we'll have an opportunity to host a Q&A on the material. This webinar was put together initially to share with business owners a few conflict resolution tools that we think may be helpful when engaging with patrons around the proof of vaccination mandate. That being said, we also want to acknowledge that many of you have already been out there doing the work and making the changes necessary to continue running your businesses in a safe and lawful way. And in doing so, I imagine that change and conflict have been an inevitable constant part of the process, and that your experience from a hospitality or a public-facing role has served you well in working with difficult situations. We hope today to provide some additional ways to supplement what you have already been doing successfully. So with that, we've organized this webinar into 4 segments. First, we're going to begin by exploring what internal resilience you already have and can build upon to respond to conflict with awareness rather than reacting in the moment. And then we'll move on to the in-moment tools, which are actions that we can take to prevent a conflict from escalating. But when an interaction does escalate, we'll look at other options that we can all rely on in the moment to move through and de-escalate the interaction. And lastly, I just want to highlight your safety is the #1 priority, and it's going to be the common thread throughout all of the segments. So if you ever feel unsafe, do not hesitate to remove yourself from the situation. Get help and call 911 for assistance as needed. Conflict is difficult. Moments of conflict are always going to be difficult. The experience of conflict is mired with a range of negative thoughts and feelings, things like anger, uncertainty, fear, even physical discomfort. And while all of this might sound like an obvious thing to say, In our experience, self-awareness is the key to dealing with the challenging moments and moving through difficult situations in the best way possible. If you were to reflect, for example, on your own lived experience, you will recognize that as uncomfortable as it is, conflict is a recurring normal part of life. I have to, for example, remind myself of this time and time again. It happens, and while we may not show up in the best ways all the time, you do have the capacity to move through it with grace and success. You have done it before, you can do it again. So the first step we can all take when engaging with a conflict situation is self-awareness, the ability to recognize in the moment that the situation has an impact on you. And that's what we're encouraging you as the first part to not ignore. Because you want to take a moment to soothe your triggered state so that you can keep your energies focused on resolving the situation in front of you and helping to shift from that potential negative reaction to a more mindful response. So getting in touch with these physical reactions in your body is the first step to getting out of that trigger state. When you recognize them, here are a few things that you can do. The first thing is to take a pause, recognize the body signs, and remember to breathe. You want to slow down and create the space to not react. For me, intentional breathing is the bridge to regulating my system, finding a place of calm, especially in a moment of stress. It's one thing we can all do to help us not respond from a place of, for instance, fight or flight, but from a place of awareness and self-control. I have to remind myself to focus on the things that I can control, and it starts with myself, my own thinking and my actions. Other things you can do is opening and closing your fingers. Sometimes when we're in these stressful situations, we may clench our fists in this way. So just taking notice of that, relaxing them, same thing with your toes. All of these are simple things that bring awareness into your body. Focus on your posture. Stand tall, stretch your spine, and make sure you're breathing well. If you need, focus on the breaths you're taking in and out. And lastly, step away. Take a drink of water. I know these are simple actions. Sometimes we forget them, but in the moment, if you take them, they'll barely be noticed by others. But these are the kind of actions that work on moving your blood around, getting air into your system, into the brain, and as a result, relaxing yourself so that you can respond from a place of calm and awareness and not reacting from a state of stress and uncertainty. I will now pass it to you, Halley.
Thanks, Justo. Okay, so Justo shared the importance of starting with self, and now we're going to move to prevention, how to approach and communicate with other people in ways that reduce the negative impacts of conflict. So the best way to prevent escalation of conflict is really to be clear in communication and tone from the start. So this includes the clear signage that you have to your property and updating your website with clear and simple language about the new policy. It's this same clear, simple, positive toned approach to take when you're working with your customers. It's one that uses positive body language, eye contact, keeps in mind our tone, and aims to communicate a sense of warmth and friendliness. Proactively building rapport with your customers is another way to prevent conflict. It's easier to work through difficult conversations with people that we have a good rapport with. So this could mean introducing yourself, asking customers for their first names, creating some sort of connection with them before sharing the policy information in a clear manner. And lastly, to be mindful of the context in the situation where these conversations are happening, which is usually in busy and public spaces like entrances. So, for example, when you're having these conversations, making sure that the visible signage is around you, and like Justo said, always remembering to take a breath before interactions, because with change naturally comes stress. So being prepared for difficult conversation goes a long way to managing and responding well. Another way thinking about prevention is recognizing or noticing signs of escalation. So if you notice these beforehand, it can prevent a situation from getting out of hand. And on the slideshow are a few common signs of escalation. I'll just point out one that you might not know about, which is the rooster stance, when your chest and your arms are protruding out away from your body. And there's a few others written there as well. And we want to be mindful of our own signs too, because our own signs will show up in our body before it registers in our brain that we're stressed or we're in that fight flight mode. So this is why it's important to always begin with that self-check and do what you need to do to relax your system. And don't forget, you can always walk away from a situation, get someone else to help you if it feels overwhelming or like it could get out of hand. And so in that last slide, most of the signs of escalation that were displayed are nonverbal. And that's because nonverbal communication is usually more impactful than the words that we use. So looking at this pyramid, you can see that words only really make up 7% of the impact our message has. Our tone, the rate at which we speak, our pitch, our body language, eye contact, how close or far away we are from someone, it's much more significant. So this goes back to that old saying, it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. And this nonverbal communication can really strengthen a first impression. And impressions are usually formed within the first 4 seconds of contact with someone. With this, we also want to keep in mind the mask factor. You might not be able to see someone else's full facial expressions, and they might not be able to fully see your own. The mask can get in the way of picking up the nonverbal cues. We live in New York. New York is one of the most diverse cities in the world. So especially here, it's helpful to remember that communication is culturally relative, meaning based on our cultural shapings and preferences, how people communicate will vary a great deal. For example, in some cultures, people will use a lot of hand gestures or speak in an animated and expressive tone, while others might communicate the same thing but less expressively or in quieter ways. Or eye contact among some is seen as a sign of respect, and in another cultural group, it could be seen as aggressive or uninvited. Some cultures, people will say exactly what's on their mind, and while in others, that could be interpreted as rude, and the listener is really expected to read between the lines. So what's most important is to be aware that there are differences, to be mindful of your own way of communicating, and be open and sensitive to the many ways that people will potentially show up. So the first step is to check your internal reactions and then do what you can to prevent conflict by making intentional choices ahead of time. And now we'll move on to engagement. So this is about some in-the-moment tools for what you can do when conflict comes up. The first one that we wanted to talk about is listening to understand. It's really one of the most important tips of engagement, and it's often the one that we tend to gloss over. A person who's expressing themselves strongly is doing so to be heard and to be understood. So we can actually let people know explicitly that we understand them, let them hear it. It goes a long way in bringing down the temperature of the conversation. And really counterintuitively, it's one of the best ways to de-escalate a tense moment is to engage with the speaker's experience as they're having it. So listening to understand means focusing on the experience of the speaker and then letting them know that you understood what they said by reflecting that experience back to them. In this part, we want to stay away from debating or offering a solution or sharing your own perspective. Really, it's using your own words and way of speaking to let them know that you get it. So, for example, imagine after you shared the vax policy that a customer came to you and said, "Are you kidding me with this? I used to come in here all the time and you never asked for proof of vaccination. You're going to lose a customer if you insist on enforcing this stupid rule." So one thing you could do is share your understanding of what the customer is saying. Something like, "It sounds like you're upset with this policy. especially because it's different from how things used to work around here. Is that right? And so after a person confirms that you got it right, there are options. The conversation doesn't need to end at understanding, but it's a critical piece in de-escalation. So simply put, before you share your perspective or you share your options, make sure that people feel that you get what it is that they're saying, what they're feeling, or what they're needing in that moment. So another tool is to acknowledge someone's feelings. Often when you acknowledge someone else's feelings, however unpleasant those feelings are, you can really bring down the tone of the conversation. And this is because our feelings are always present. And when they go unacknowledged in conflict, they can become more central and take up a more prominent role. So naming another person's feelings or injecting feeling into your own tone can serve as an acknowledgement of that person's experience, and it can itself be a way to de-escalate a challenging interaction and lead to a more satisfying conversation. Feelings also give us information about what's important to people or what people's underlying motivations and needs are. The vaccination policy touches upon the needs people have around freedom, civil liberties, and safety. And so when we can understand the needs of the other, that's one way of building empathy and connection. And that really brings us to the next thing that we wanted to share with you, which is a tool of empathizing. Simply put, empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's taking a moment to reflect on why they might feel the way they do and why this issue is important to them. Empathizing with someone else verbally can acknowledge and validate their experience, even if it's different from your own. So we'd encourage you now to help you build empathy with those that will challenge you on the vax policy to reflect without judgment on the following questions. So why might someone disagree with the vaccination policy? Why might someone not have their vaccination proof on them? How might someone be impacted if they were inconvenienced in this way? Or why might someone not want to get vaccinated at all? So I'd imagine that whether you agree with the responses that you thought of, you can likely relate on some level to why these things might be important to people. And that's what empathy is. It's not agreeing with someone. It's not agreeing with what someone is doing, but it's really understanding why they're doing it or what need it's meeting for them in that moment. Another simple and effective tool to use in the moment is asking questions. I think we know this, but we all generally prefer to be asked something rather than told something. And sometimes it can be as simple as rephrasing things that you'd usually say as statements and putting them into questions. So the first one, if someone is being disrespectful to you, instead of saying, you can't speak to me like that, try rephrasing it into a question. What is it that you'd like me to know? Or you can phrase questions with permission, asking for permission, getting someone to say yes. It can give a moment of pause to a conversation. So instead of saying, I need to interrupt you to tell you the new vax rules, it's, do you mind if I interrupt? I'd like to make sure that you have the most accurate information about how our space operates given the new guidelines. And when you can, present options. We have a few more tools to just keep in your back pocket. One is silence. Sometimes giving people an opportunity to vent can be helpful. And if you have to interrupt them, have it be to understand, using that listening to understand tool, or ask a question rather than tell them what to do or why they're wrong. If you can also find agreement with someone, and if you can find agreement, meaning if you can find some truth in someone else's statement, it can take away resistance. It's not about validating a behavior that you disagree with, but you're really seeing if there's any truth in the statement, if you can find any truth of what they said. It could be as simple as, I agree that this is a real change from how it used to be. And also apologies. Apologies are a demonstration of empathy to someone else's experience. And when it's genuine, it demonstrates humility and that we're all doing our best. So we also want to talk about disengagement and how to disengage well and safely. So ending well really means maintaining your composure throughout and keeping in mind that treating others with dignity and respect is really the golden rule. Whenever you can, trying to be transparent about the policy and the next steps that you're taking. Trying not to take people's reactions to the policy and the inconvenience personally, and maintaining that positive body language throughout the interaction, remembering that people can see us even when we stop talking. And most importantly, if you feel unsafe or in danger, it's really about disengaging early, getting someone to help you, and in escalating situations, calling emergency services. So this is the summary of the 4 steps that Justo and I talked about. We hope it's been helpful, remembering SPED, self-check, prevent, engage, and disengage. And we also wanted to share some helpful sentences and phrases that you can incorporate to demonstrate, that will demonstrate some of the skills, engagement skills that we talked about, and Justo will help me do that.
Yes.
So, thank you. So the first one, demonstrate listening to understand.
I understand that this is a real inconvenience. You're a regular and valued customer. We're going to do whatever we can to make sure you feel welcomed here.
Acknowledging feelings and empathizing.
There have been many changes over the last year, and I know it's not easy. I do understand your disappointment.
Apologizing.
Sorry that this is so frustrating and that we can't do more for you this evening.
And then being clear in your position.
We are required to enforce this policy as per NYC regulations. Unfortunately, I cannot admit you without proof of vaccination. Please do bring it with you next time.
Offering options.
For now, though, I can show you some good seats for outdoor dining or perhaps a takeout menu.
And ending well.
Thank you so much for doing your best to be patient through this. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Justo. So
Welcome.
we hope these phrases are helpful. And we also wanted to mention, Commissioner Kletter and Ariel mentioned this earlier, but at the center, we offer mediation services to businesses if they have ongoing conflicts around quality of life issues with neighbors unrelated to vaccination status. And this program is called MEND. It stands for Mediating Establishment and Neighborhood Disputes. I think that there was a link in the chat posted earlier, and it's also on the slideshow. So that's the end of the webinar portion, and we're moving into a Q&A portion now. And I think Sam had just wrote in the chat, if you'd like to submit questions, you can type them into the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting. And myself, I'm here, Justo will be here, and we're also going to invite our Executive Director, Judge Ray Kramer, to join us as well. So hopefully the 3 of us, if there's any conflict resolution questions around the webinar, that we could take them now. And I will stop sharing my screen as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Solomon. I'm the Chief of Staff at Oath, and I'll be moderating our questions. Again, to submit questions, please use the Q&A function of Zoom, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. If anybody's having difficulty using that, please feel free to send a chat message on Zoom to the hosts and panelists, and I will address any issues that I can. I would also ask if anybody has any question, in addition to any questions that you may have, we would love to hear from people about any good advice you might be interested in sharing or any tips that have worked for you and your business. And we'd be happy to share those out with others. So please do share any questions you have. I will, we're getting a few questions in. I'm going to start with one or two for Halley and Justo and Judge Kramer. Are there any words or phrases that business owners or operators or employees should keep in mind as things they might want to avoid using in these moments of conflict?
I can share one. And one of my personal favorites is to avoid telling someone to calm down. It might be what you want them to do, but usually when you're telling someone to calm down, that's usually not. It only escalates a situation. So avoiding saying that to someone, and rather presenting with a question, perhaps like, what is it that you'd like me to know? I want to make sure that I understand, and then trying that listening to understand tool could be really helpful.
Excellent, thank you. And please feel free, if anyone has follow-up questions on these, you can submit them via the Q&A. Another question, how would you handle an instance, how would an employee handle an instance in which people have already been explained what the rules are? You've attempted to use your conflict resolution techniques like SPED, and the customer or customers are still insistent.
I mean, I could jump in on that one. I think, if the tools that you've tried don't seem to be shifting the situation, at some point, it's that disengage well that Halley and Justo talked about, apologizing and not internalizing that, because it's more about empathy when you're apologizing. And you all know this as experts in good customer service. And then just being really clear that you're enforcing a policy. You don't have the option to do otherwise. You appreciate the frustration, but at this point, you can't let somebody in. And again, the options. And I think if it still persists, of course, and if someone feels unsafe, look for support or call 911.
I can just add one thing to that, and I know, Sam, in the question, it was, what if you've gone through all of your conflict resolution tools? But I just want to highlight, like, the one that we do tend to forget is the listening to understand. And usually when someone is speaking louder or repeating themselves, it's because they feel like they haven't been heard. So it is coming back to that. Even if maybe you did it once, it might be doing it again. But like Ray said, knowing when to walk away and getting help. But really saying, and maybe injecting that feeling too, like, I understand. It sounds like that this is really frustrating and this is really ruining your evening. Is that right? I want you to know that I get that part. And at the same time, I want you to understand that this is the option that I have for you right now. Something like that.
I'll just add too, I think Justo and Halley said this well. We can only control what we do and say and think. And it's easy, particularly if someone else is escalating, to get pulled into that, to get kind of hijacked into the fight-flight state that they're in. So just continuing as everything is happening to self-check and continuing to do your best to center yourself and try and come from a place of kindness and compassion. So much of good conflict resolution as we experience it is counterintuitive. You want to sort of match unconsciously the state that someone else is in, but actually what's really effective is to, do things that help lower the tension and that are not mirroring what the other person is exhibiting. So if someone raises their voice, you lower yours, or you listen and be silent. And it's so important, we don't think about it as much, tone, the pitch, tone, and the volume of your voice and your body posture. We impact people, we impact each other, and we can impact people in good ways just by managing our nonverbal communication as best we can.
Yeah, and I'll just add something that we mentioned in the webinar about your own experience already managing situations that are difficult. Not about the vaccination, but I'm sure that if you were to reflect on the experiences that you've had, that there are situations that have been difficult, and whether it's checking with self or getting some support from a manager, there are some things that you have already been doing, thinking about hospitality and customer service that you can also, that will also work well in situations like this.
That's great. Thank you, guys.
I think Adam
we have
shared
a couple.
I'm sorry, Sam. I think Adam shared a great comment too, just a reminder that it's not about us. People are frustrated about something bigger and not taking this personally. And I think in customer service, you all probably know that well and experience that. So just a reminder not to internalize it.
We got a couple of questions about potentially fraudulent or suspected fraudulent vaccination cards. For that one, which is a little bit distinct from conflict resolution tips, I'd like to hand it over to our colleague, Jose. And Jose also typed in an answer that you can find in the Q&A on this topic. I'll also paste it in the chat for folks. But Jose, do you want to speak about that briefly?
Hi, sorry I was on mute. This is Jose, the Deputy Director for the Office of Nightlife at the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. For folks who are asking about fraudulent or suspected fraudulent vaccine cards, I'd refer you to one of the answers that we've just posted in the Q&A. If you suspect someone is presenting a fake vaccination card, you may report it by calling 311 or report it to the New York State Attorney General by filing a complaint, and there's a link to file a complaint. There's also a toll-free phone number in that answer as well. It's 833-VAX-SCAM. That's VAXSCAM.
Great, thank you very much, Jose. Another question came in. The question is, I'm having difficulty handling a conflict with another business that shares space with us regarding this vaccination process and the vaccination mandate. What would you recommend to help resolve that conflict with another business?
So I can share, I think that this might be, if you do want to sit down with the other business, this might be a place where you could use the MEND mediation program. And that's really having each of you sit down with a mediator that's provided by MEND to see if, like what the conflict is about, and seeing if there's a way forward for each of you based on what's important to each.
Can I add to that also that the way we think about mediation is an opportunity to have direct communication with someone you're in conflict with, and to try and work that out with the help of trained, neutral facilitators, the mediators. And we think of it as you can try it, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And if it doesn't work, you still have the ability to take whatever other course of action was available to you. So you don't lose anything in that conversation, but a huge upside in making a connection and maybe being able to work something out directly.
We got another technical question, which Jose, I'd ask if you're able to help us respond to as well. The question is, for For takeout orders, if a guest orders food and needs to wait 30 minutes, must we ask for their vaccine information to wait indoors? And if so, what are your recommendations? Or if so, or if not, I guess, what are your recommendations to avoid upsetting guests in that instance?
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to have to look into this question specifically. I don't know that there is an exact time limit on the mandate. We can say that guests of any kind, whether it's a customer or a delivery person or an inspector, may enter the premises for a quick and limited purpose without being required to show proof of vaccination. Those guests must wear a face covering if they are doing so. So that would be the response I would give. We can look into this question about the exact time limit. If this person who's asking the question wants to provide their contact information, we can get back to them.
Great, thank you, Jose. I also know for any technical questions that people have, you may want to refer to some of the resources that are available at nyc.gov/key-to-NYC. And we can put that link in as well. Some of the information, including the one-pager that I linked to earlier about conflict resolution, is also available at that location. Oh, we have another question here. We're getting a few more in. Are there any tips that you would recommend to help encourage guests to wear their masks when they're getting up from their tables? How would you speak to a guest about that?
I can share. I mean, I think like if we think about the prevention, if that is going to be something that you'd like staff that you'd like guests to do, to share that up front, right? Like, what are the ways that we can prevent conflict? And part of it is making sure that people have all the information at the beginning. So when you are seating people, you know, kind of reminding them, like, after you've checked their Vax card and thanking them for that, but also reminding them that when they are moving about the restaurant, we are going to ask you to put your mask on, and that we will, you know, like, gently approach you if we see that you aren't wearing a mask.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Halley was saying, always be mindful of your tone. You know, how you engage. Go a long way in having people comply if you speak with them in a way that is respectful, and again, thinking back to the hospitality skills and experience that you have engaging in that way.
I just wanted to clarify, it's Ariel from Office of Nightlife, that under this mandate, it's not required to have masks on when people get up from the table as part of this mandate, once they're inside and vaxxed. That would, if anything, that's a personal choice at a establishment, but I just wanted to make sure there was no confusion that was what is required of patrons once they're inside and show their vax, unless they're unvaxxed for the quick and temporary purpose.
Great, thank you, Ariel. Okay, we're getting a few more questions in. Just a moment. Okay, we have another question. This is a particularly hard role for some employees and can be stressful and frustrating. Do you have any tips on how they personally can handle their reactions to this kind of situation?
So I can I can share. I think it's a little bit about what Justo was saying about that self-check. Yeah, that this is a lot for people that are in customer service, public facing roles, and in hospitality, like you have been for a long time. So I think part of it, if it's talking about encouraging employees to find places for themselves, either at work or before getting to work, to really have more compassion for themselves and for their work and whatever they need to do, like Justo was talking about, there's things that you can do in the moment, but there's also long-term practices like making sure you're taking a walk or taking deep breaths or drinking water, and to the extent that you as the employer can show up with compassion, I think would go a long way as well.
I think it's
That's
always
great.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was just going to add, I think it's great to feel recognized and to feel valued. So to the extent you can support one another, as a team and as work colleagues, and if that involves some meetings or just some conversation before, at the end of the shift, expressing appreciation for one another. It's a hard job. You're on the front lines, and know that we all appreciate the work that you do. So it's always great to feel valued, recognized, appreciated, and supported by one another.
We have another question for Judge Kramer. How do you handle a situation like some of the ones that people may have seen in the news or on YouTube, in which a group of people may be entering in order to conduct a protest and refusing to leave, as opposed to a one-on-one situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, and it just strikes me as a tough one to try and have a conversation or a dialogue. There may be reasons that people are coming into the group, and they may have a particular agenda. So it may not be that they're amenable in the moment to the kinds of tools that we're talking about in a one-on-one interaction. So, my thinking is that may be a situation where you want to alert security and/or let 911 know that the situation is unfolding. Reach out through 911.
Great, thank you. A couple more questions on more technical aspects of the policy, of the regulations. One for Ariel. If an inspector enters and sees that an employee or customers are inside without a mask on, would the restaurant or bar be at risk of a violation?
I don't believe that is what inspectors are searching for. It's not necessarily a violation, since those who are inside who have been asked for their vaccine ID are presumed vaxxed at that point. What inspectors are looking for is to make sure that there is the poster in the window that describes the mandate. They're also looking to observe people asking for their ID and vax card at the door, and also to have a written plan of how they are operating and executing the vax mandate. That's what they're searching for at this time.
Great, thank you. And we have one other question for you as well, Ariel, which was about restaurants that may, or businesses that may decide who require proof of vaccination, even for short visits or for takeout or for other types of similar, what Jose had described as brief entry into the establishments. Is that acceptable from the business perspective? Do they have discretion to go beyond the key to NYC requirements?
So the language is quick and temporary use in the space. But yes, the businesses can go beyond the mandate if they choose. that you can always go beyond the mandate, but I think then you would have to have really good language and make sure to train the staff, like as we're doing today, to make sure to communicate how and why, what their rules are, and that they acknowledge that it is beyond the baseline mandate.
Great, thank you. We have another question for Halley. Can we get some advice about having conversations with staff members who are hesitant to get the vaccine or to comply? Are there any tips that you can provide to influence them or speak to them in a compassionate way?
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I like the compassionate part of that question, and I think it's really tough, right? Like we can't force people to do things, but I was thinking that it's a moment to think, like, we talk about these tools as that they're tools that you can do with customers, but these are also tools that you can use with your own staff. And like when there's conflict that's coming up in your own staff, like these are in essence, like Commissioner Kletter mentioned, we're mediators, and these are some skills that we use in the room to help people that are in conflict have difficult conversations. So you can take a lot of these tools and use them to have a difficult conversation with your employees around the vax policy, like that listening to understand, acknowledging their feelings, asking them questions, but then also sharing where you're coming from and what feelings are coming up for you and what your own needs are. That you could use these same tools to have that conversation with staff.
Great, thank you, Halley. Any other questions that people would like to submit? We have one more question for Ariel and Jose, similar to a prior question, but elaborating on it a bit. May a business also ask for proof of a negative COVID test in a recent time period, in addition to the key to NYC mandate?
I'll have Jose confirm, but I think much like the other additional requirements they might choose to implement at their venue, they may choose to do so in their own space. But Jose, could you just confirm that for me?
Yeah, that's correct. A business may choose to go beyond the mandate, but asking for proof of a negative recent test would not be a substitute for checking proof of vaccination.
Thank you for that clarification. Not a substitute.
Yes, thank you.
Sam, if you're talking, you're on mute. Hate to do that to you. Sorry.
Thank you. No, it's very helpful. We had a couple of questions from people asking about us sending the slides. The slides are actually available in the YouTube video that Halley and Justo recorded. I will put the link in the chat here so that everyone has access to it. So you'll be able to see, in addition to the one pager that I linked to before, a link to the YouTube video that includes all of the slides that they presented on here. We had one more technical question come in before we close it out. I think this is one for Jose. Is it correct that a customer only needs to have received one shot to meet the requirement to enter?
Yes, that's the current policy.
Great, thank you, Jose.
There's one about staff too, Sam.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And Jose, that applies to staff as well?
Yes, that applies to anyone, staff, customers.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, I think we've
Yeah.
run through the questions. If there are any questions that we've missed and they deal with technical aspects, I would recommend visiting nyc.gov/key to NYC. There's also contact information there if you have further questions and need help. I will put the link in the YouTube link in the chat in a moment before we close it out. But for now, I will pass it back to Brittany from the Hospitality Alliance.
All right, great. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us. I don't need to tell you how difficult this time has been. So I want to really thank you all for doing what you're doing and serving the community and your dedication to keeping your staff and your guests safe. And of course, I want to thank Commissioner Klitter, Justo, Halley, the Oath team, Ariel, Jose, the Office of Nightlife team. Huge thank you all for facilitating this webinar and your continued partnership. And we are all here to support you. So feel free to reach out to us. The Alliance is here to help. You could reach out to us at info@thenycalliance.org. If there are any remaining questions, we'd be happy to pass along any sort of information to any of these agencies. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day and thank you all again.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.